I'm Enrico Gruen, and this is Second Nature. Greetings, prisoners of gravity. This is Commander Rick. Every week, I talk to science fiction writers, fantasy writers, horror writers, and comic book writers. And now, inspired by their work, I've written the great North American novel. It's called Moonbase Beta X. It was a dark and stormy night. Dark and stormy night. Okay, I haven't proofread this yet. A meteor shower bombarded Moonbase Beta X. That's some solar flare-up, he ejaculated. Yes, replied Amanda Pucker, the tawny yet intelligent Moonbase commander who looked like she'd been poured into her uniform in a way that suggested she was not a trusting person. Well, Nancy, huh? A real page-turner, eh? Okay, well, here's the big plot twist. Suddenly, a meteor exploded too close for comfort, exploding the outer bulkhead into 1,000 fragments of plutonium, which luckily for Amanda and Dawn exploded outwards in a massive explosive decompression. How had it come to this, Amanda sighed as she hurtled into hard vacuum, while ironically her mind raced back to the day her world fell apart, when the planet Earth imploded. Not bad, eh? You're just jealous. All right. Since so many of you have faxed letters asking how you can improve your writing, today we'll look at writers' workshops. Nancy, run that short story with the sad ending.
Rising anti-Semitism in Eastern Europe has voted English-only sign. 40,000 tons of armed with PCBs blew up the ozone layer today.
Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
The Clarion Writers' Workshop by Commander Rick. Since it began in 1971, the Clarion Science Fiction Workshop, that's dull, emphasized conflict. Clarion East in Michigan and Clarion West in Seattle battled to produce the very best, give characters memorable names. Science fiction authors Kim Stanley Robinson, George Alec Effinger, and Vonda N. McIntyre all attended, no, that's too listy, include romance. Science fiction writer, editor, and critic Kate Wilhelm and her loving husband, editor, author, and critic Damon Knight, run Clarion East, host Clarion East, organize, are the force behind. There's no way to say this. Damon, what can a student expect once they're accepted into a Clarion workshop?
Well, Clarion is a 6-week summer workshop. Each week there's a different instructor, each of whom has his own idea of how to do it. And they get a certain amount of theory and a lot of workshopping. We sit them down in a circle every day. They write while they're at Clarion. They don't sleep. They just go to lectures, write stories. And their stories are copied so that everybody in the circle has one, and they've had a chance to read them and annotate them. Right. And then we sit in a circle and criticize the stories. But we don't demand that the students write science fiction or fantasy. They can write any kind of fiction except hardcore pornography or something of that kind, which we think is impossible to criticize.
Kate, what does going through the Clarion process do for a writer?
I think what it does primarily, to go to a really good workshop, Clarion is a very good workshop, and primarily what it does is lessen the time of apprenticeship. The apprenticeship, which most people don't understand, runs from 8 to 10 years. From the time somebody starts to write until that person is pretty accomplished. Usually it's 8 to 10 years. There are always exceptions, and I think Clarion might whittle off a couple or 3 or 4 of those years and make it easier. That's the main advantage. And the other, maybe as important, is to rescue new writers from isolation. They are so lonesome. They are so isolated. They have so few people, for the most part, to talk to about writing, about what they want to do and what it means to them, and so on. And Clarion, for many of them, is the first door into a companionship with other people they can admire, respect, and talk to in a frank way. So that's important.
Damon Knight and Kate Wilhelm teach at Clarion every summer, along with an ever-changing collection of instructors also drawn from the top ranks of SF. The daily regimen of teaching and critiquing is grueling, but rewarding enough that the best instructors return. Instructors like Orson Scott Card, Connie Willis, Geoff Ryman, Kristine Kathryn Rusch, and Pulp House publisher Dean Wesley Smith. Oh, Dean is married to Kristine. That could be my romance. Kristine Kathryn Rusch and her loving... Chris, what should a Clarion instructor do to make sure students get the most out of the workshop?
Each one does it slightly differently, but essentially they control the round-robin critique, where, you know, it goes around the room and everybody has their chance to speak. You can't interrupt the person who's speaking on the critique, except to say, you know, I can't hear you. And that gives even the shy people, who are often the ones who have the most to say, the most interesting things to say, that gives them the floor. So that's one of the ways that Clarion works. You know, it has this structure that has worked for 20 years, 25 years. The other way that Clarion works, though, is it gives the writers time to get to know each other. So, you know, you're there for 6 weeks, you're not there for 2 days. And so you're able to say, you know, person X is more attuned to the kind of things I'm doing in my writing, so when we get to person X, I'll really pay attention to what they're saying. And person Y is really good on grammar, so when we get to them, I'll pay attention to what they're saying.
I think there's a common misconception, however, about Clarion and other workshops, which is that you go to have your work critiqued, and that is what will make you a better writer. Actually, although I think you benefit somewhat from having your work critiqued, I think you benefit even more from critiquing other people's work. When your work is critiqued, all your defenses are up, all your barriers. I did not, I do not, I will not. And so you really don't hear. Your ego's involved, your personality's involved. The whole idea of rejection, everything is real scary. When you critique other people's work, you analyze, you say, well, this is moving very slowly. This story doesn't start till page 17. This was a mistake. You build up to this huge climax and then you just let it go. You don't do anything with it. And then gradually that sort of infiltrates into your inner self and improves your writing, changes your writing radically. Judith Merrill said one time in a panel that the only reason to go to a workshop is to critique other people's work until you are able to critique your own.
Out in the real world, the students are going to have to deal with the harsh reality of editors. Does the critiquing process prepare them for that?
I think what they're doing is they're training their own editor. And they're training their own editor not to be emotional, to be objective, so their editor doesn't turn on them and rend them to bits. So that, you know, you don't sit there and say, oh, I know what the problem with this is. You just get a tiny little warning bell tinkling or a tiny little flattening of response. And that tells you this story is going off the rails a bit. It's all you get, and you've got to learn how to hear it. And they're developing an ear, in other words. They're beginning to hear when a fantasy name is a bit wrong, when there's a bleeding away of tension. And they're also learning all sorts of other material to help them identify, once they know there's a problem, identify the kind of problem they're facing, at what level.